Uhuru, you are tuned in to the White Lies Shattered Reparations in Action podcast on Black Power 96.3 FM radio in St. Petersburg, Florida, and live streaming on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Lisa, and I will be your host today. White Lies Shattered, also known as Reparations in Action, is a program of white solidarity with Black power. We believe that reparations to African people is the key question of our times and is one that demands action on the part of European or white people. We salute and thank Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party for leading the African Revolution and developing the theory of African internationalism and the understanding of the colonial mode of production. African internationalism is the theory and worldview of the African working class that guides the struggle for African liberation and which we credit for all of the understandings and analysis provided on this podcast. I'd also like to salute Black Power 96 Radio, where this show originates. Black Power 96 has a tagline that says, not just explaining the world, but changing it. And you can get the Black Power 96 mobile app on Google Play or on the Apple App Store and listen wherever you're located. And Black Power 96 is listener funded radio, and we are in the July fund drive now. So I just want to encourage people to contribute towards our show goal here at White Lies Shattered Reparations in Action. We have a goal towards that fundraiser, and you can contribute to it at blackpower96.org/reparations. And I'm very honored now to be joined by Penny Hess, who is the chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee. And we are also excited to have a special guest today, Paulo Cruzalegui. And I just want to welcome you, APSC Chair Penny Hess, to introduce our special guest today. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Lisa. And I just really want to welcome everybody here. I'm so happy and honored to be able to be back with Black Power 96 radio out of St. Petersburg, Florida, but broadcasting to the world. And I really have tremendous unity with the slogan, the motto of not just explaining the world, but changing it. And the African People's Solidarity Committee, I just want to say, is a very unique organization. There is no other organization like this. We are an organization of white people under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party that is working and is led by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Deputy Chair Onezene Yeshitela, and the African People's Socialist Party. And it is working for one thing, the total liberation of Africa and African people everywhere. The chairman has worked tirelessly for that for nearly 60 years now and has built organization on the ground throughout the continent of Africa, throughout Europe, and here in the US, and now extending into South America and the Caribbean. Very exciting worldwide movement. So I want to start by saying it is very much in the news about the earthquakes in Venezuela recently and the conditions there. And we want to give our deepest solidarity with the people of Venezuela. And as our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, has stated, African people are one with colonized peoples everywhere. So African people and the people of Venezuela are one because they are colonized people in a system that the chairman has defined as the colonial mode of production, which is really important to understand. That colonialism is not something of the past. It is not something that was only of a certain period, but it is the very essence of what this government and system it's the DNA of the world that we live in today. That the United States, the wealth of imperialism is built on the assault on Africa, the theft of African resources, and the kidnapping and theft of African human beings and labor for 600 years on land stolen from the indigenous people where where genocide was committed. And, you know, this is really critical that we start with this basis. So today we do want to talk about Venezuela, and we are honored to have with us compañero Paulo Cruzalegui, who is the leader of Los Ronderos de las Redes and a member of Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Steering Committee and the Latin America Front. So just Paulo has been a very important friend and comrade of the Uhuru movement for a couple of years or even longer, and just brings so much to this. And I just wanted to, before we start with speaking with Comrade Paulo, I would like to just play this clip of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who was invited to speak at the Oxford Union in 2019 in Britain. And he opened his presentation with a statement of solidarity with Venezuela as they face the US coup attempt at that time. So the US has attacked Venezuela for literally, not only for decades, but for centuries. So let's listen to what the chairman said in England in 2019.
I now look to Omali Yeshitela to continue the case for the proposition.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I have only recently come here from the United States of America. And that being the case, I cannot stand before this august body without prefacing my statement in defense of closer unity of Africa, without stating first my unconditional solidarity with President Maduro and the government and people of Venezuela, who are currently under attack, savage attack, by the declining world hegemon of the United States. I think it's absolutely necessary to say that coming from that country, and especially looking at the fact that the United States travels the world preening, presenting itself as the guardian of democracy and the rights of the peoples around the world, where the reality is that Africans who are colonized in the United States represent at least half of the largest prison population in the world. There are more Africans in prison in the United States than there are people in Djibouti or in Equatorial Guinea. And so we find it very difficult, also recognizing that by their own estimates, it would take 228 years for the income of Africans colonized in the United States to equal that of the colonial white population. So it is absolutely necessary for me to stand here today before you expressing total opposition to the United States government terroristic actions against the people of Venezuela with an attempt to starve the people into opposition to their government.
Uhuru, that is such a powerful, the chairman is so eloquent and just really, really puts out the essence of the theory, the political theory of African internationalism, seeing the world through the eyes of the African working class and oppressed and colonized people, which is what we want to do. And I think it also brings us, brings to mind the reason that the show is called Reparations in Action is because as white people who live at the expense of African and oppressed peoples, our work is reparations, to return the stolen resources. That's why we're called Reparations in Action. So I just want that to be clear. And I do, again, profoundly salute that amazing, eloquent, electrifying presentation by the chairman in 2019 in Oxford, England. And that presentation elicited a standing ovation that just went on and on and on. It was very, very powerful. So thank you for playing that, Comrade Lisa. And Compañero Paolo, welcome. So good to see you and have you here with us today.
Uhuru. Great to be on and make my debut. Sorry about that.
Uhuru.
Yes. Uhuru.
So just want to say a little bit about you, and we'll get into the, into the discussion here. You seem to be always on the move. I always see you whenever I see you, even in a meeting or on social media, you're somewhere. And as you have in the background of where you're sitting right now, you have flags from throughout the hemisphere, and you are just work tirelessly with the message of anti-imperialist, anti-colonial struggles for liberation throughout the Caribbean and the Americas, particularly, but throughout the world. And Paolo, you have such a great wealth of knowledge about the struggles and uprisings in the Southern Hemisphere in particular, and especially led by the indigenous people throughout that region. And of course, as we said, we in the African People's Solidarity Committee, under the leadership of the party, we believe that this land belongs to the indigenous people from Alaska to the tip of Chile. And you seem to know so much about this. You talk to us about Chile, Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti, Argentina, and so much more, Peru, Ecuador. So I'm excited to be able to talk to you today, comrade. And so Comrade Paolo, tell us, first of all, where are you? Where are you based?
Yes. I'm based in SoCal, Southern California, where I organize in communities in Orange County, in Los Angeles, and in San Diego, and where there's a lot of struggles in these communities to organize with different variations of colonized peoples, of migrants, refugees that came from destabilized nations that were caused by the U.S., of course. So, yeah.
So, were you born in the U.S. or are you from elsewhere? Or I assume your family is from elsewhere as well.
Yes. Yeah. So I was born here in California, and my parents are first generation migrants from Peru. Both of them are Peruvian, but my ancestry stretches to China, to occupy the Basque Country in Spain.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Very interesting. Well, I know that at least one of the organizations that you are part of, Los Ronderos de las Redes. Could you talk to us about what is your organization and what kind of work does it do, and tell us more about it?
Yes. So first of all, Los Ronderos de las Redes was created in 2021 when we had the previous presidential election in Peru, where we saw the electoral victory of the people with Pedro Castillo, who is currently now a political prisoner. He was just like President Nicolas Maduro and others throughout history. He's a kidnapped sitting president right now. And so we have campaigns as Peruvians for seeking justice for our martyred victims of recent massacres. Peru has had many revolts because of these colonial history of this, the conditions that still are present. The people who rule us in Lima are the white colonizers, what we call we can identify them as loyalistas. Back then, they would be called the royalistas, who align with the king, and so the loyalistas align themselves with the U.S. and particularly nowadays with Israel.
Wow. Well, just in terms of, we know that the U.S. long has referred to the Southern Hemisphere as the America's backyard. And it's not a new thing, the kind of thing that President Trump is trying to do right now, or doing, is basically making it blatantly clear that the oil of Venezuela somehow belongs to U.S. corporations. And so I just wondered if you could talk about just this struggle over the years. You talked about President Castillo now in prison, how we've had there was this wave of socialist and progressive governments in the time of Hugo Chavez, but then there is what the Chairman O'Malley Shatella calls counterinsurgency, that wants to fight against and destroy the ability of the people to have power. So if you could just talk about President Castillo in prison, and I know others are as well, just this whole struggle for self-determination and sovereignty of the peoples of South America.
Yes. Well, I first like to go back to recent history in the 20th century, before my time, where this is a reiteration of what took place with after the assassination by the CIA-trained Bolivian forces that assassinated Che Guevara and his Cuban revolutionaries comrades there. And so that was afterwards in Nixon's administration, they understood to implement a wave of what you say, counterinsurgency. Back then now, it was called a Plan Condor, or Operation Condor. And now
Condor, yeah.
Now we're seeing a revitalization of this, not called the same, but it's being called the Monroe Doctrine. The U.S. is re-implementing all these ideologies of white supremacy, of colonial subjugation over the Americas, and so they're doing all this to prevent any left-wing, any anti-colonial resistance, any victories electorally or by the gun, just like how the Sandinistas in Nicaragua or the Bolivarians in Venezuela or the Cubans have done in the 20th century and 21st earlier of the century. So they've ousted many presidents. They've conducted many lawfare attempts with the help of the CIA, with the help of in coordination with local reactionary forces on the ground in each of these countries. Where we've seen it with Evo Morales in 2019, Pedro Castillo in 2022, where I was there on the ground when this was taking place. He was arrested, and it was an illegal impeachment vote. The Congress that is what we call a captured government is aligning themselves with the U.S. And politically, they are ultra-right Fujimoristas that have very much a lot of disdain for the indigenous campesinos. They've been enriching themselves, and this is the same things we're seeing throughout Latin America. Abuse of power, impunity, cementation of their colonial capitalist system, and that's how. That's who the U.S. government, no matter who's in power, aligns themselves with. But right now, under President Donald Trump, we're seeing an escalation of all this, with the Shield of the Americas being created recently, led by Kristi Noem, who previously led the ICE operations here in the belly of the beast. and as the Department of Homeland Security. Now that is being operated all over the Americas with the FBI, DHS presence, not only Southcom militarily training these, but coordination in sharing intelligence across the continent.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising, but it is chilling. And it is what this system does. It's what colonialism does. It really, I think as the chairman says, that colonialism means completely rule without regard for law. Anything that the colonizer wants to do, they can do. And there was a book about Vietnam from a few years ago called Kill Everything That Moves, and the motto of the U.S. in Vietnam. And that's what we see over and over again. And half the time these things are exposed 20 years later, but as if, it means nothing. It's just as if it was a quirk and not the norm, as the chairman says, that colonialism is the norm. And, I wanted to talk about this, what has been in the news quite a bit, the Venezuela earthquakes. And that, first of all, I do want to say that what I really appreciate, one of the things I really appreciate about you, Comrade, is that you have so much knowledge of the struggles of the indigenous people in the Southern Hemisphere. You have so much knowledge of the whole interactions of it, and of the fact that in South America, throughout South America and the Caribbean, it's still the same. There are white people, there are colonized African people, there are colonized indigenous people, and other oppressed peoples within that. And so what you have brought to the fore so much for this movement is just so much information about the struggles of the indigenous peoples of South America, things that we never hear about. And you talked about Peru. I know there was recently an invasion of Peru by the US. So let's talk about some of that. What are some of the things that specifically that the US is doing to try to crush the movements in South America right now? And then I would like to talk about, just this incredible resistance of the indigenous people that we don't hear about at all here.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of these indigenous organizations, social movements that are fighting back throughout these recent years, even before Trump, because of these governments that align with the U.S. Politically, such as Daniel Noboa in Ecuador, Javier Milei in Argentina, Jose Antonio Cas in Chile, Nayib Bukele in El Salvador. There are so many instances of the people rising up against their local comprador governments, because what we're seeing, for example, in Chile and in Argentina, they're essentially giving land free to the Israeli Zionists to settle. We're seeing that in Peru, that they're vacationing in and buying up land in Cusco, in the Sacred Valley, the Valle Sagrada. They're not only tourists, but they're permanent residents to try to escape justice for their war crimes in occupied Palestine. And so what they're doing in Chile, for example, is that they're proposing laws. The Chilean government is proposing laws to give up land of the Mapuche people. And so the Mapuche people are resisting against this new version of colonialism, of settler colonialism. And in Argentina, they're also evicting indigenous peoples off of their own lands. This is the constant invasion by the white settlers, the colonizer population, that Chile and Argentina have long been predominantly white, part of the colonial elite that they say that they had their revolution against Spain, but they still align themselves with colonially with the same
Yes.
mentality.
Yes, I mean, I have read that. It's white, but also because the genocide of the indigenous people, and there were enslaved Africans throughout South America, was almost complete. I've read that, and there's incredible books like Open Veins of Latin America, and other books that give some of the history of the colonization of the peoples there and the genocide. So I was, yeah. So anyway, just to be able to hear from you this resistance and see even videos and things that are going on, and that has been going on, of course, for centuries, because it is the indigenous people who lead the struggles.
Yes.
So yeah. Well, I know that we did want to talk a little bit about the two major earthquakes that struck Venezuela on June 24th. And the Orinoco Tribune, which is based in Venezuela, and is edited by compañero Jesus Rodriguez Espinoza, who is a very important member of the Latin America front of the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Fight Back Coalition. He edits the Orinoco Tribune, and it was reported that the death toll had reached, this is a couple of days ago, nearly 2,300 people in Venezuela. Over 11,000 people have been injured and 6,400 had been rescued. And I read today that it's reported that 2,500 people had been killed, with 12,721 people displaced, and 774 buildings had collapsed. So can you talk a little bit more, about the conditions there, and what are you hearing, and what are you understanding, and what kinds of resistance are is going on there?
Yes. So earthquakes, first of all, are pretty rare on the Atlantic side for Venezuela. And if we have a ring of fire in the Pacific side that mostly affects my area in California, all the way down to Peru and further south, and to the other side, of course, to Japan and so forth. But this particular earthquake was double the tragedy. Two major, 7.2 and 7.5 afterwards, just 39 seconds after another.
Yeah, it was like one continuous. People thought it was
yes.
the same long thing.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
And so it was very reminiscent to my understanding of how it was in Turkey and in Syria, which happened 3 years ago. Two major earthquakes. Yes. Tens of thousands that were killed in that tragic scenario, because whilst Turkey was not sanctioned as part of NATO, Syria, on the other hand, is occupied by various military governments, militaristic powers, including Israel and the United States. And so they were, in multiple fronts, military speaking, whilst having to, deal with lack of resources due to the sanctions imposed by the West. And so this is a similar scenario where Venezuela needs all the support that it can get. They provided a rescue team back then to Syria and Turkey, and they're in need of a lot of resources at this time due to the sanctions and blockade still in place. The Trump administration will not let go of their power, their grip over the Bolivarian Revolution, because they want to still hold leverage over the Venezuelan people and the government for being defiant still to this day, and for demanding their kidnapped president, Nicolas Maduro, and first combatants, Celia Flores, for their release, which their trial, their third hearing is going to take place on July 22nd, actually on the same day as the oral
The oral arguments of the Hands.
Lots of coincidences.
Yes, it is. Well, I know that, yeah, just the reality, if you could talk about the reality of the kidnapping of the elected president and first combatant, which is Celia Flores' title. They don't call her First Lady. She's called First Combatant, very revolutionary stand. Um, talk about, yes, let's talk about that, just the outrages against a violation of every tenet of international law, which of course the U.S. is an illegitimate colonizer and settler colonialist, but it was just a brazen, just action against an elected government. Could you say something? I believe you've been out there. Were you out in New York where they're being held? They're being held in Brooklyn, New York. Yes,
Yeah.
if you could say something about that, comrade.
Yeah. So the situation for these two political prisoners, they declared themselves in front of the first court hearing that they're prisoners of war, because this is a hybrid war against Venezuela led by the U.S. And the West, including Europe, because they also imposed illegal sanctions and seized Venezuelan financial assets abroad. So the U.S. is not alone, but they still, they embrace themselves under the Trump administration as the colonial dictatorship of the world, the police of the world. We of course, as colonized people, know how police operate with police violence and impunity, abuse of power, and corruption, of course. And so they're, they're doing all these lengths to kidnap a sitting president, which is not the first thing before. They've done this against Haiti's president, and the of course, as I mentioned, Pedro Castillo. This was with the help of the U.S. ambassador, who was a CIA agent as well. And so there's a deep political manipulation throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, and all over the world as well, of course, that the U.S. is vehemently trying to impose its will, and militarily or through the electoral box, through rigging the elections. They will not allow another anti-colonial sovereign state to exist. So for Venezuela's for Venezuelans and back home, they're demanding for the freedom of their kidnapped presidents, because they're under this crisis still, with the sanctions, with this recent earthquakes. 146 at least that were deported, Venezuelans that were deported from the U.S. Just hours before the earthquakes happened. They were killed in all of this mess, and for lack of a better term. And that was the fault of the United States for deporting them.
Say that. So as they were being deported, they were killed.
They were held in a hotel, and one of those hotel buildings were of course collapsed. Which the scene, of course, in the coastline looks like Gaza. And so even before they were kidnapped, there were in total now, since September, beginning of September 2025, there have been a total of over 200 military actions of getting people killed in the Pacific and the Atlantic side of the ocean, in South America. Venezuelans, Colombians, Trinidadians were killed because of this U.S. Southcom aggression. With the planning of invasion, of preparations in occupied Puerto Rico militarily, so for in New York, I was there for the first time in New Jersey as well, visiting for a Cuba Solidarity Conference led by the National Network on Cuba. There was a presence, of course, for the Solidarity for Venezuela's kidnapped president and first combatant, because these are issues that so similar. Both of these countries are heavily sanctioned, and blockaded. And Venezuela provided the relief that Cuba has long been needing, which is the oil supply. And now, when the U.S. has destabilized Venezuela's government, and now Cuba is without that energy and in constant starvation as well. And so there's a lot of efforts right now to provide humanitarian aid to Cuba at this time, but also the fight needs to go on for the freedom of Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores and other political prisoners, as recent as Alex Saab, who's currently being held in Florida.
Tell us a little bit about the situation in Cuba now, because the U.S. has tried to overturn Cuba since the 1950s, since its victory, but it has really worked to starve the people, in this period, it seems like. Could you talk a little bit about the situation in Cuba?
Yeah. So there are several delegations that are organizing trips throughout this time. But these are long-term organizations that have been fighting for the sovereignty of Cuba from abroad, and they've been seeing the constant, U.S. Imperialistic aggressions against the island. They even occupy a sector of the island called Guantanamo Bay for their CIA black site, and also proposals, even by the Trump administration as recent as that, to hold Haitian migrants there. And so this is where Cuba still is being occupied there, but there also no end of relief. There's no barely any help or any acceptance by the U.S. government to have real negotiations to lift the blockade. Every year there's the UN floor vote that where the whole world votes yes to remove the blockade imposed by the U.S. And the only two countries mainly are Israel and the United States. And we understand that Israel does the no vote because it is also occupying, seizing. It has a siege over Gaza. For us as Latin Americans, we view that Cuba is very much like that, in the same position as Palestinians.
Wow, and I know that the conditions are of near starvation in Cuba, but I also know, just wanted to look at that again. I know that they have been very brilliant in growing food on every inch of grass or inch of soil on the land, but that it is a very dire situation right now. And there have been these large boats and stuff that have been sent by progressive people to try to convoys that attempted to bring resources to the people, but that's just obviously not enough, even though that is a powerful stand of solidarity. Could you say a little bit more about what is happening there, and how are people, how are any resources getting to the island?
Yeah. So I want to mention as well is that Cuba is, they're facing the constant destabilization threats by the U.S. And they're being isolated politically, economically, medically. I want to say where their delegations, medical brigades around the world, especially in the Caribbean and in Central America and South America, are being cut off. Their work. These medical brigades, they provide the free labor, but the state provides the funds to support their work. effort. I meaning the states, the local states, and so these regional, these governments in Ecuador that has turned to the right, Honduras and so forth. They're even Jamaica, even they're suspending their relations. For some of these cases, they're suspending diplomatic relations with Cuba, isolating it further. Sending the brigades back home when the people need them there to provide the free healthcare service around the world. So for this year, we've seen a Nuestra America convoy, as you mentioned, similar to the Global Samud flotilla, as we recognize as human rights activists the dire situation in Cuba as similar to as in Palestine rather, and there's a constant efforts for delegations to go there to the island. I am looking forward to go to the island for the first time, possibly twice in the end of the year, because we need to provide the humanitarian aid that the U.S. government is hindering. We need everybody to do this effort, providing, gathering medical supplies, fundraising for this, because the state won't do it. And we need a state level of operations to provide, energy, oil, all the basic necessities that the Cuban people need, because what the U.S. is trying to do is definitely destabilizing the government and pushing it to do, pushing the government to do have a more concessions and compromise its bend its sovereignty. And so right now we're defending the sovereignty of Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and whilst fighting for our sovereignties in across Latin America and the Caribbean, such as in Peru, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, in Chile, and Argentina, and so forth.
Great. I mean, it is really powerful in terms of the response of people around the world. Again, something that we don't hear a lot about. It's pretty much whitewashed in this U.S. Colonial media. It's not something that we hear about or read about. You have to dig for that to find the response. But that it seems that peoples around the world have stood with Cuba. And with Venezuela. And, I was just wondering if we know that the settler state of Israel is is sort of the attack dog of the U.S. in some ways. And it is something that the U.S. uses to attack peoples around the world. And I was just curious if you thought that the settler state of Israel was playing a larger, more overt role throughout Latin America than in previous times. So I just hear you mentioning it from time to time. Yes,
yeah, it is doing so even before October 2023. But for one example, in the 20th century was in the Guatemalan revolution, the Civil War. The U.S. was not willing to arm the anti-communist and paramilitary death squads, but Israel was, and so Israel has been used to be the medium to instead of having the U.S. do the dirty work and get blood on their hands, Israel is willing to do so, and they've been practicing that for over 75 years already in occupied Palestine,
yes,
and the surrounding regions in their conflicts. And so the Israeli presence is growing right now. We recently heard a couple of months ago of what we call the Honduras Gate, where the former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, he was imprisoned and in the United States for drug trafficking. He was a narco president in Honduras, and this was happening. He was sentenced during Trump's first term in 2017, I believe. And so he was released in the end of 2025, leading up to the Honduran presidential election, which also there was a heavy electoral manipulation, interference by the United States government, and the U.S. The president himself, of course, endorsed the ultra-right figure for the candidacy, for the presidency. And so there were signs of electoral fraud, and that, you know, it's also being played throughout in Peru's election, in Colombia's election as well. Gustavo Petro's country, Colombia, President Petro says that that the elections may perhaps been rigged by, you know, interfered electronically, digitally, by the Israeli state. And so there's all these constant threats that we not only have to, you know, cautiously with at the North America referring to, but we have to also be aware of our the East, Israel, but also the surrounding countries, because now they're you know, plagued with the U.S. military presence, with U.S. Southcom, with the constant trainings with the police forces and military to repress the people back home. There's even a current military exercise called RIMPAC right now over this summer that happens biannually, where now this year it's 30 countries or so. Last time in 2024, where we were protesting, organizing around that, it's been about 20. What we've seen with, you know, recent elections, victories of the reactionary international, they are you know, forming relations with the U.S. and reestablishing relations with Israel as well.
And the U.S. recently literally invaded with troops on the ground in Peru. Is that correct? Recently?
Well, what we can say is that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's in what we can say about Peru is that we have an occupation. There's a military occupation with at least 5-7 U.S. bases in Peru. There are purchases by the Peruvian government of for $3.5 billion for warplanes created by Lockheed Martin and other war profiteering companies, including Elbit Systems. And so there's these, you know, there's these contracts, deals, military speaking, you know, to increase their presence, their influence, militarily, economically, politically. And for Ecuador, they have a innovation, despite that constitutionally, because of Rafael Correa's government, constitutionally it is forbidden for a foreign government to own any you know, bases, to have any troops from a foreign government in Ecuador. But under Daniel Noboa, who is a close U.S. ally, a narco president himself, he is you know, in league with the drug trade and U.S. Military, constantly with you know, advisement of Eric Prince from Blackwater and so forth. They have a serious presence in Ecuador, and now they're gaining a bigger foothold with these recent elections in Peru, in Colombia, with Keiko Fujimori and Abelardo de la Espriella. So they're looking to get their hands on everywhere because of the natural resources, for the lithium, gold, silver. For example, Peru's Peru is ranked second for the in the world for its production of silver. There's a rich uranium deposit that is untapped in Peru, and you know, there's already a this February, I think it was, or March, there was already the end of the last New START treaty with Russia, between the U.S. and Russia. And so, if the U.S. gets a hands on more uranium, they may be, willing to produce more, atomic weapons, expand their nuclear capabilities, and, even probably, sell it to France, to Europe, due to how Burkina Faso is rising, and the Sahel overall, defending their natural resources and defending their people from foreign aggression, from terrorist foreign backed terrorist groups as well in the countryside.
Is there any overtly socialist anti-colonial movement in South America right now that is visible?
Well, not centralized, I would say, but there's a lot of these socialist and communist groups that are, align themselves in solidarity with Venezuela, with Cuba and Nicaragua, mainly the first two. But it's spread out to only, not as much having international meetings, but there are, but it needs to grow a lot more. In the 21st century, what we call in Latin America, the socialism here is the socialism of the 21st century. It is a great difference from the previous century, where the people won their revolutions by the barrel of the gun, with the Cuban Revolution first, and then with the Sandinistas, and so many more. Now, of course, with the Venezuelans, anti-imperialist government too, but there is just constant interference by the U.S. government that has destroyed the zone of peace, essentially. That it could reawaken. It could reawaken that time period to reiterate itself, just like how the U.S. is really operating again as a plan Condor, as Operation Condor 2.0. So they're trying to prevent any further freedom fighters like Palestinians have any more Iranian governments, or any more sovereign governments like Cuba, Iran, all the Troika resistance and the Axis resistance. They're really trying to prevent any of these resistance movements from rising and taking powers.
Wow. Well, this has been so profound, Comrade Paolo, and we're just about to the end of our time. And I do think that it is profound that the African People's Socialist Party has relationships with various comrades and organizations in South America, and has a Latin America front of Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa, as it is building around the world. And I do have tremendous optimism that we are on the doorstep of a major movement among colonized peoples for socialism, for self-determination, and an end to this parasitic system that is built on the backs of African and indigenous peoples, and the ability of all people in the world to live in peace, no one at the expense of anybody else. So this has been very profound. I really would like to have you on again. There is so much more we could talk about in the region and in the world, that just, really appreciate all of the facts and understanding and analysis that you bring to this. So it's been very, very exciting. Can you just tell us, before we close up here, is there a place that people can go to support a genuine, true relief effort in Venezuela right now? Is there anything like that? Is there a good place that people should send resources if they can?
Yeah, for one, I recognize that Code Pink is doing a lot of work. Codepink.org, I believe it is, their website. They can find them on social media, including YouTube, where they've been part of delegations to Latin America before, including the North America convoy. They're all over the crisis on Palestine as well. These type of organizations have been doing that groundwork there to build those relations for the U.S. to see that people from the U.S. in the belly of the beast are standing in solidarity with the Bolivarian Revolution.
All right, so they are collecting resources to go to Venezuela, which the U.S. is not doing.
Yes.
And anyway, wow. Well, it's been really profound, very powerful to have you with us, Paolo Cruzalegui, and I just want you to be back again another time. I know you have been on One Africa Worldview and other, put together by the Burning Spear and the African People's Socialist Party's Agitprop team, Director Akile, and just, really great program that I salute so profoundly. And I would really like you to be back on in the future, that we can talk more about this region and the world and how to go forward, the role, that we can play under the leadership of the African Revolution for a world without oppression, without war, without colonialism, a world in which everyone can live, no one at the expense of anybody else. So I appreciate you so much. Thank you. And do you have a website? Do you have a place where people can reach you? Yes.
Thank you. Yes. Well, people can contact our organization, Los Renderos de las Redes. They can find it on social media, even from my personal account to the Burning Spear, the Peruvian Chasqui. If they type that, they'll find that on Telegram, on Instagram, on Upscroll now, where they'll find it in the bio, Los Renderos de las Redes, to get linked up, as we're confronting the anti-imperialist, confronting the imperialist aggressions in Latin America and all over the world, of course, in solidarity with the Uhuru movement. And we're really looking forward to the people's victory on July 22nd, and the deep solidarity for Venezuela as well. For
that will be the
both Uhuru 3, for the Uhuru 3 and for Maduro, of course.
Uhuru.
Yes. Well, and
I know we have to go.
Well, I'm going to mention that in the announcement. So I just want to thank you so much, Chairwoman Penny and Paolo, for this really important discussion to shatter a lot of white lies about what is happening in Venezuela and other places in Latin America. And just really look forward to more discussions like this. And we just wanted to let people know about some other programs coming up, including tomorrow, Saturday, July 4th at 10 a.m. U.S. Central Time. There's going to be a webinar called Colonialism versus Fascism with Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Luwezi Kinshasa, Secretary General of the African Socialist International, and APSC Chair Penny Hess. And that's going to be on the Burning Spear TV YouTube channel. And then the following day at 9 a.m. U.S. Central Time, Omali Taught Me returns with a program titled 250 Years of Genocide and Resistance, and that will also be on the Burning Spear TV YouTube channel. And then, as Chairman Penny and Paolo were mentioning, from Tuesday to Wednesday, July 21st to 22nd, everybody needs to come to Atlanta to attend the oral arguments in the Uhuru 3 appeal, and there's going to be a rallying event the day before and a summation right after the hearing in the morning. And so you can find out more information about that at handsoffuhuru.org. And just the final announcement, a reminder to contribute toward the White Lies Shattered Reparations in Action show goal. We're fundraising as part of the Black Power 96 July fund drive. You can do that at blackpower96.org/reparations. And we'll talk more about that in our next live show on July 17th. And so we're looking forward to that in 2 weeks. And I just want to thank you both again, Chairwoman Penny Hess and to Paolo for being our special guest today. And to our audience, you have been tuned in to the White Lies Shattered Reparations in Action podcast. Our show airs Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern Time at Black Power 96.3 FM radio in St. Petersburg, Florida, and live streamed on YouTube, and then on demand wherever you get your podcasts. If you have a question or idea for the show, please email us at whiteliesshattered@blackpower96.org. And until next time, unity through
Reparations.
reparations. Thank
Uhuru.
you, everyone. Uhuru.